The purpose of the Global CFO Council is to provide an educational and networking forum for senior financial executives in order to share best practices, discuss current financial issues, and to learn about current topics related to the performance of their jobs. Membership is open to senior financial executives including CFOs, financial VPs, and treasurers. We hope that you'll become a member of the Global CFO Council today. To join, please visit the membership tab at globalcfocouncil.com.
Kelly is the head of CEO Talent at CEO Discovery, CFO Discovery. It looks like you got your undergraduate in psychology. Appropriate enough. I've known enough CEOs that to be head of CEO Talent, you probably should have a degree in psychology. And then an MBA from Rochester Institute of Technology, I think in an HR concentration. And because no one can ever have enough education, I think you're going back and getting another master's degree right now in maybe social work from Nazareth College. Is that correct?
You got it.
Wow. Long career in human resources, leadership, and career counseling and education. And a couple of interesting things. I think you're into hiking and kayaking.
Yes. Yes, I am.
And do you know sign language?
I do.
Bam. How did you learn sign language? What's the story there?
Rochester Institute of Technology has a National Technical Institute for the Deaf arm to it. So going back for my MBA, it was just, you had to learn in order to be able to interact with half of my classmates. So I was fully immersed. It was a great
really
experience.
Cool. Well, it is our honor and pleasure to have you. I know you're going to be speaking in just a bit, but coming up next is Kelly Harris. Kelly, how are you doing this fine morning?
Wonderful. Thank you for having us.
Founder and CEO of CEO and now CFO Discovery. Long-time serial entrepreneur and very interested here. And I looked up the company a little bit. A sommelier and founder and president back in the day of Imperial Wine Storage. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So we know who to go to when we need a recommendation of a nice red.
Mm-hmm. Or white.
And now I have to say, I looked online, and that Imperial Wine Storage, that's some serious collectors of wine. This was, I'm into cars, and it looked to me like a garage for wine. Like you had like display, people were decorating them. They were storing massive collections of wine.
Yeah.
Wow. I don't have friends as cool as friends where you are. I don't know anybody who needs wine storage. I wish I did. The people I know, like Dan Poirier, just drink all the wine immediately. There's no real storing. And a longtime Floridian, it looks like. I'm from Florida, undergraduate in English from the University of Florida. Is that correct?
It is by way of New York City, where I lived in Hong Kong and New York for 25 years.
Nice. Well, I got that kind of right. Okay, I'll take it.
Yeah. But I'm back in Florida, so it's all good.
Kelly Harris, I'm going to mute myself and advance the slides as you go along. And I'm very much looking forward to this presentation and just appreciate you and the team putting this together so we can learn a little bit about both your platform, but what is it that PE firms are looking for in CFOs? Clearly the most important position of the operating company, obviously. And I'm going to mute myself and learn.
Great. Thank you so much for that delightful introduction, Robert. CFO Discovery. We connect experienced CFOs to leading financial sponsors. For the purposes of this presentation, we are focusing on the private equity firm. Financial sponsors are always in need of CFOs as they buy, invest in, and manage companies. By way of background, our initial effort was to target CEOs, presidents, division heads, and board members to join the platform. But as we were speaking with our clients, they emphasized their need for CFOs and COOs as well. So today we're delighted to speak to you about CFO Discovery as a distinct vertical within the CEO Discovery ecosystem. Next slide. Our topics will include today an overview of the private equity firm itself, just to bring us all on the same page, and what it is like to work in that environment, how it is similar, but also different than working as a CFO outside of private equity backed company. We'll also touch on compensation and actually show you the app. We'll pause midway to take a few questions, as well as at the end of the presentation. Okay, so the private equity firm structure. At a very high level, a private equity firm is incorporated as a general partnership. As we've noted here, they are actually pretty small firms. The firm size may be 10 to 20 individuals, increasing in size as the fund gets larger. But they typically have 3 to 5 partners or managing directors who lead deals and also run the firm. They have a team that includes analysts, associates, principals, and VPs, as well as a back office. And a PE firm relies on both operating partners and, more specifically, the management teams at the portfolio companies to actually run them. The partners don't have the bandwidth to step in and run companies on a day-to-day basis. So as you think about these general partners over their partnerships over their lifespan, typically they start off with a few pre-fund deals or pre-investments, also, as you might know, as an independent sponsor. If they are successful, they'll raise their first fund, and they may target $250 million in equity capital. Typically, a fund has, on average, 10 portfolio companies over its lifespan. If they're able to invest the money, hold it for a period of 3 to 4 years, and hopefully harvest some of those deals to raise a second and subsequently a third fund, with the fund sizes increasing over time. By way of background, each fund generally has 10 to 40 limited partners as investors. You can see here, they can be pensions, insurance companies, endowments, and these are the people that the private equity firm reports to on the performance of their funds. Generally speaking, each general partner or GP spends most of their time reviewing new deals and negotiating transactions. This leaves only a third of their time to actively manage their portfolio companies. This is why PE firms emphasize that they know how to buy companies, but they do not know how to manage them. A GP will typically review around 500 investment opportunities in a year. They may sign NDAs to review 250 books that an investment bank might put together, and they will bid on as many as 50 deals a year. They will only make it to about 15 to 25 of the management presentations. And all of this work is done throughout the year simply to close on 1 or 2 platform deals for a typical fund size range of $250 to $750 million. It's a lot of work to do. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. There we go. This next slide focuses on the board composition of a portfolio company. If you think about the 10 different portfolio companies within each fund, each partner at a firm may oversee 2 to 3 portfolio companies at a time, while they are also working on new deals. The lead investment partner often serves as the chairman of the board, and there are usually 2 to 3 professionals from the private equity firm as well as the CEO. You'll also find outside directors that'll be on the board, and the more the merrier, generally speaking. Sometimes the CFO is also a board member, but more often they are not. However, the CFOs are included in the board discussions and almost always give a presentation. Board meetings and calls are a formal occasion and are typically scheduled every month or at least on a quarterly basis. That said, the level of interaction between the private equity firm and the management team can be far more frequent. Each private equity firm has their own management style that is reflected in how often and how closely they partner with the management team. In many cases, the lead partner may speak to both the CEO and the CFO on a daily basis. The board construct is really important because, as we mentioned earlier, these private equity investors are constantly focusing on taking in new transactions, negotiating deals, and trying to invest in new platforms. And they have very limited time to manage their existing portfolios companies. Therefore, they really rely on the board structure to manage them. The CFO role is important because during a 3-hour board meeting, he or she has 45 minutes to an hour to present. This is why strong communication skills are required of the CFO. All right, we'll move on to the attributes. Attributes valued by private equity. Now, the big takeaway here is that for a CFO, there are several similarities and differences to working in private equity versus a public or a private company. The biggest thing is private equity is the sense of urgency. A typical fund has a 10-year lifespan. It has a 5-year investment period and a hold period of 3 to 5 years for each company, at which point they will sell. Upon selling, they are looking to make a pretty high return on capital. Most PE firms are targeting 3 to 4 times multiple invested capital, which I know you're all very familiar with, the MOIC, if you will. So if you are trying to make 3 to 4 times MOIC, you only have 3 to 5 years to do that. So you have to have an extraordinary sense of urgency compared with about just any other corporate situation. Thus, the phrase, as soon as you start, the clock is ticking, really rings true. Now, teamwork, this kind of goes without saying, but if you're going to affect change in a large organization in a short period of time, it requires teamwork. It's impossible to do this on your own. And as a CFO, you really need to be an integral part of the team. We'll talk more about this later, but this is also why the relationship between the CFO and the other departments, as well as the CEO, is so critical. Bias towards action. Again, given the limited time that you have to affect change, do the right analysis, figure out the right answer, and take action. Private equity is a lot of analysis. Problem-solving focus. In a similar vein, private equity is very solution-focused. You must be able to quickly diagnose what is wrong with the business, systems, organizational structure, and get it solved and fix it as soon as possible. Many times, PE firms invest in a founder-owned business that's maybe privately held for 30 years and might still actually be run by the founder. As the CFO, you'll have 3 to 5 years to top grade the management team, change the systems, improve the controls and reporting, definitely in an expedited fashion. Common theme here, right? It's all about solving one problem after the other as quickly as you can. And lastly, goal orientation. We discussed the concept of the multiple of invested capital. And if you apply a time reference, you get an internal rate of return, IRR, and both of those return metrics are driven, of course, by EBITDA. As most of you know, this is done over time by increasing the scale of the company, making the operations more efficient, driving higher profitability and more growth. You always want the next investor to pay a higher purchase multiple than the current investor did. Super important. I'm going to pause here and answer any immediate questions that you might have before I hand it over to Kelly Umansky.
Kelly, we do couple. I'll hit you rapid fire.
Yeah.
And in addition to the attributes laid out here, any particular industries or skills that are hot right now that come up a lot from PE firms looking for CFOs?
Right now, it's healthcare tech, ed tech, anything in veterinary, and I would also say plastics and packaging in industrials and industrial aerospace and defense.
I notice, and this one's for me. Most of the jobs say CPA, and I am a CPA, but they don't say CPA or CMA, and that's a certified management accountant. And a certified management accountant, I'm not, but it actually is more of a test of what I do than the CPA. I was just wondering, do you know, are you even familiar with the CMA? Does that ever come up, CPA required versus CMA? Any thoughts on that?
Yes, our data has shown with private equity, a CPA or CMA is not exactly required. It's helpful because a lot of these portfolio companies will have two kinds of CFOs. They'll have more of a strategic CFO, which maybe that person may have come from an investment banking background, And then you have like a more of a numbers kind of a strategy, not the strategic type of a CFO, but they generally have a strong controller or another CPA support. So that's why you obviously have to have a strong financial background, but it is not required in either case.
Kelly, I'm going to combine a couple questions in here around there seems to be an ever-growing number of private equity firms. You spoke a little bit to that, but are we imagining something, or are there twice as many, 3 times as many PE firms as there were 10 or 20 years ago?
Definitely. I think there's something like 5,000 to 6,000 of them out there. And I think that the ones that are most relevant in our arena are the top 1,000, because we pretty much focus on the private equity firms that are about $500 million all the way up to many billions in their funds. So just remember, a lot of those are startup funds, and they're also very, very small.
Depending on which article you read, there's somewhere between $1 trillion to maybe $1.5 trillion of dry powder. And so there's just a lot of dollars chasing deals. And what is the competition like? So there's a lot of dollars, and then there's a lot of firms. What are you seeing on the competition side, not just of trying to find talent, but just trying to find deals?
It's fierce. So yes, capital is not the scarcest resource. There's plenty of dry powder. It's the deals. It's the deals and finding an angle on deals that help these private equity firms win them. So that, in addition to the whole war on talent, is a huge challenge for private equity.
Last slide, you had a note around outside directors. And a question is, are those outside directors, are they investors in the fund, or are they independent, and the private equity funds are just trying to find independent outside directors for the board? How does that work? How do you become an outside director?
They're generally more industry focused. A lot of them have been ex-CEOs in a particular industry and come in as to really lend their advice and guidance. So oftentimes they can't find enough of them to come on that have the right fit. They could be invested in the fund as well, but most of them will have some kind of an equity scheme as well attached to their package.
Kelly, any sense a slide or two ago when you talked about that time horizon of the fund, and that they might have multiple funds, and they're every 3 to 5 years they're getting out of one fund and into another one. The exits out do you know how it breaks down in between roll-ups to other private equity firms, or say going public? Do you know what those outcomes of those time horizons, what are the most likely outcomes? I'll pull back to like this slide here. So fund one in 3 to 5 years. Mm-hmm. What are some, if you had to bracket maybe the top 1 or 2 or 3 most likely outcomes in that time horizon, what would they be?
They generally do get sold within 3 to 5 years. Sometimes if there's an issue, they've got to hold it for maybe another 6th or 7th year. As far as IPOs, that is absolutely an exit, but that generally happens at the Carlyle, the Blackstone, or the KKR level, very, very large funds. But for most of the time, they are sold to either a strategic or to another private equity fund.
Kelly, what's your history to this problem? How did you get started, and why?
I do have a background in recruiting that started when I was living in Hong Kong. But after I sold Imperial Wine Storage, I wanted to go back into search and wanted to do something a little different. So I was acting more as a talent agent for CEOs, and then introducing these rock star candidates to relevant private equity firms that might have an interest. And it wasn't happening fast enough, and realized this business model needed to be quickly tech enabled, but the tech wasn't there until just before the pandemic hit. And that's when I spent 2 years developing the app, so that when someone applies to be on our platform and is accepted, it's a closed platform, they can be in front of 41 of my clients. And there's no other place in the world where someone who wants to be in private equity can be in front of all these leading private equity firms all at once in a private setting.
Kelly, you seeing any, what did COVID do to these time horizons? Did it push things out? Did it move things up? No change to those time horizons? What are you seeing?
Very mixed results. I think if anything, you see the whole period just a little bit longer.
I'm going to hit you. I want to pull off this page a couple things and have you emphasize them because I think they're important. And I'm going to start with an umbrella question. I see sometimes CFOs not be successful because they've come from much larger public companies. And any maybe traits or skills that people have picked up as very successful CFOs in a different environment other than private equity that they need to avoid, that they're bad habits maybe even from large public companies when transitioning into a private equity backed firm. Any thoughts there?
Yes, I think when you're coming from a larger public company, and you've got to understand that this really is a roll up your sleeves environment. You've really got to be engaged, and you've really got to make sure that either you or your team is doing the proper analysis and get to a conclusion and then implement it. Because the accountability is it's swift and the sense of urgency is always there. So just be very vigilant about that. Also, we were recently talking to a healthcare CFO, and he comes from a larger public company experience. And he said, I walk the factory floors, and because I realize that the problems don't always present itself. So I'm always looking for things to fix. And that surprised him.
Oh, you got to write that down, folks. That drives me nuts when people tell me they have an open door policy. Well, good. It should be open because you shouldn't be in there. Why are you in your office? You're not getting paid to be in your office. That's not right. Where the biggest problem is.
That's right. That's right.
Well, you said something super important that I wrote down, which is the CFO role is very important. So that's an excellent emphasize. Let's transition to the second Kelly number 2. And then we'll hit some more questions here. I got to hold some of the questions that I'm getting for next part. Kelly, I'm going to advance the slides and then mute myself.
Okay, thank you. So just a quick plug. I was made aware that there is another MBA from RIT in the audience, and I have to say that's probably the top skill needed in private equity. So thank you.
I'm sorry, you're starting to break up. I'm sorry, You're starting to break up.
So, all right, I won't spend too much time on this slide because this is, the skills needed in private equity in terms of what what you're coming in with. A lot of that is very similar to what you would find outside of private equity. Financial expertise, the deep accounting knowledge. Yes, that is essential. Kelly mentioned that a CPA or a CMA, those are not mandatory or those are not required, but certainly having that accounting knowledge is very, very helpful to what you're going to be doing. Broad sector knowledge is also helpful. And certainly, depending on the industry that you're in, making sure that you have that specific subsector familiarity is ideal. Teamwork, we're going to hammer on this, I think, throughout the presentation. Having the ability to build, motivate, and manage your finance team, you are the one who's driving that. So have prior management experience and experience building a team, I think is key. Understanding and coordinating with operations, this is, I can't underscore this enough, making sure that you're not just sitting in your office, that you are an integral part of the team. You're able to, really seamlessly coordinate with other functions. That's key here. And the communication skills, similar to teamwork, you have to have them. Being able to communicate clearly, concisely, being able to drive meetings, especially those board meetings that happen on a monthly basis. And then making sure that you're implementation oriented. I see this similar to the point that Kelly mentioned on the prior slide of having that bias for action. Make your decision and move on it. All right. So regarding just the strict responsibilities of a CFO in private equity, these also, they don't differ too much from those who are outside of private equity, but there's a couple of things to note here. So certainly accounting and controls, FP&A, liquidity management is huge because, as you all know, a leveraged buyout will almost always have the maximum amount of debt on the balance sheet. And this flows into not only managing your liquidity, but also managing your lender relationships. So having strong relationships with lenders is key. When you have a liquidity issue, that is not the time to start new relationships. It is so critical that you remain in constant contact with them and that you keep them updated on your situation. Mergers and acquisitions. This is the bread and butter of a growing company. And one of the first questions that we get asked by a private equity firm is how much M&A experience does the CFO candidate have? For growth. So there are add-on acquisitions that can be folded into the existing organization. Often when a private equity firm purchases a company for a 12 times EBITDA multiple, part of what they're betting on with the continued growth of the company is not just that organic growth, but also inorganic growth through these add-on acquisitions. Their goal is to buy these add-on acquisitions at multiples below their purchase price. And if they can buy these series of add-on acquisitions that say 6 to 8 times, they can blend down their overall multiple from the initial platform. So synergies analysis. So for that, if you are looking at add-ons that are really in sync with your operations, there should be some synergies at either the revenue or cost level where you can increase revenues with the companies working together, or you can decrease costs. So for example, if you're closing a facility and bringing all of that production into an existing facility at the platform investment, being able to determine how much it would cost to close that facility and what the annual EBITDA savings would be for that action, that's all part of that synergies analysis. You want to be able to build that value over time through the add-on deals. Next slide, please. So we thought it was really important to highlight how a CFO and a CEO are really strategic partners to each other. The key roles of a CEO include obviously being the leader of the organization. They are focused on value creation and growth. Oftentimes this means that they have the more sales-oriented personality. They're typically more vision and high-level oriented, very persuasive, and they have many external audiences. They have to report not only to the private equity firm, but also sometimes it goes all the way up to the limited partner investors that they'll be preparing information for. There's also government and other regulatory groups that the CEO is dealing with sometimes, the media, customers. A lot of the work of the CEO is not just being the leader of an organization, but a lot of it's managing those relationships with the external audiences. And while all of this is happening, so the CFOs, they're the complementary role. They're more internally facing. Certainly they're responsible for accurate reporting, but really they're the ones who make sure that all of the trains run on time. When the CEO is away on a sales call, the CFO is the one that's making sure that everything is still performing back at the firm. To effectively do this, we go back to teamwork and the need for the CFO to have that really strong collaborative relationship with other departments within the organization. Sales, operations, human resources, in addition to overseeing the strategic initiatives such as M&A. The quote down at the bottom, this lays it out so well. The healthier the relationship between the CEO and the CFO, the better the outcome for the whole organization. Kelly and I were on a call recently with a healthcare CFO, and he shared that he is on the phone daily with his CEO. He presents to her all of the different scenarios and options. They discuss, and then she hops off the phone and she'll run with the course of action that they came up with together. So this is another quote from one of our wonderful two-time PE-backed CFOs. PE firms want a CFO who is thinking about operations from a financial management perspective and always focused on equity value creation. So at the end of the day, that MOIC and IRR result, this is what's critical. And you really want to view everything from that financial perspective. But you really have to think in terms of the business operations, in terms of KPIs, and not just as that auditor or the bookkeeper, but thinking more strategically about how the business is being run and how it can be improved over time. All right, this is the fun stuff. So in terms of compensation, these are their general ranges. Everything varies significantly depending on particular situations. But typically, CFOs in private equity, they earn a base salary. There will be a targeted annual bonus. And then there will be an incentive compensation, which is calculated as a percentage of the value created upon exit. So the example that is laid out here, it shows a CFO base salary of $300,000 over a 4-year hold period. Maybe they earn a bonus that is, say, 100% of the base salary over that same 4 years. But then you look at value created. So if you have a company where the private equity firm invested $100 million and they exited at $400 million, so 4 times MOIC, that would be the equivalent of $300 million of value created. And in this case, the CFO would share 1% of that, or $3 million. So total all-in compensation over the 4-year period would be $5.4 million, with the majority of that actually coming from the contingent and value-based incentive at the end upon the exit. So averaging a little over 1.3 million each year, that's not a bad package. Yes. So for better or for worse, the challenge of a CFO is that you are typically in a role for, say, 2 to 3 years. And then you're looking for another situation in the sense that a private equity backed company that will get sold. CFOs get turned over with some frequency. And what this enables you to do individually is to reinvent yourself with each new challenge as you continue to take your experience and really look for that next opportunity. So next steps. The next steps for each of you would be to join us. Join CFO Discovery. It is a private closed platform that is free for you to join and use. You can apply directly on the website. There's the apply button at the top right-hand corner. All applications are reviewed by me and my team. And for any follow-up questions, please do not hesitate to contact Kelly and me. We would be happy to set up a time to speak with you more about CFO Discovery and what your goals are within private equity. I know we're going to pause here for questions, but after that, we're actually going to take you right into the app.
I will hit you up in no particular order with some questions, and then whoever y'all feel is best for each one of these questions, just chime in. I'll pull something from that most recent slide around compensation. A couple of questions were around how does the compensation work when you're, say, not the original CFO? How do they calculate the incentive or variable portion of that if you're sort of mid-deal, if you will?
Well, of course, it's going to vary, but the comp structure is going to be made up of a base and a base and then a bonus, and then there will be some, again, that will be tied to equity at the end of the deal. So it will just depend on where they are and how mature the company is.
Do you get the opportunity? Let's say you worked on one deal and you roll into another operating company. Is there an opportunity to invest in the operating company as a CFO? And how there might be additional compensation that's earned by it, in addition to having the opportunity to work there and be part of that variable compensation you just laid out, maybe seek a return from an investment?
Absolutely, yes to all of that. So if it's worked out with one, generally when a private private equity firm finds good talent, they don't want to let it go. So if you're moving on to another fund, you move into another investment, a lot of times you can roll into your gains into another new deal. Did I answer your question?
Yes, definitely. I'm trying to back up to, there was a slide that you covered, Kelly. You were talking, oh, here it is, acquisitions on slide number 6. And you said that's a key thing that's brought up, that's asked. What is considered a lot of M&A experience by a private equity firm?
I would say somewhere between at least 10 to 15 deals. It's enough. But you're going to get a lot of action in that area. So I just want to make sure that the CFO is really confident in executing M&A. And
the integration part, like PMI or the post-merger integration, how important is that experience? You know, there's deal side folks with due diligence and valuation, but they weren't responsible for actually executing the promises that they made. How does that work?
Hopefully, in most situations, the CFO has a team to help them with integration.
And I'm going to combine a couple of questions here from the chat around how do you get experience if you don't have experience in this area? Now, I'll think of it, at a very high level, is if you want to work at a private equity-backed operating company, very often it's a requirement that you have experience working for a private equity-backed operating company. So any thoughts on getting the experience when you don't have the experience?
You're right. PE likes to hire individuals who already have PE experience, but 3/4 of people on our platform don't have any PE experience. And guess what? They're still getting hits from private equity firms. So my advice would be start with a smaller fund. You can get your way in that way.
Another question that and this, we get this one a lot, maybe corporate controllers that are the VP of finance. They're the number 2. Yeah. They're probably really the one doing all the work, making it happen. But they're not the CFO yet. And what are your thoughts on the difference between the controller and VP role and what the CFO role should be? Any thoughts on that? If somebody was wanting to position themselves, lean into some skills, what's that difference between being the corporate controller or VP of finance and being the CFO?
Well, if I were a VP controller who wanted to become a CFO, I would definitely make my intentions known. And I think it's a little easier to move into that role when you're working at these portfolio companies. It's a little bit more fluid that way. But asking to take on more responsibilities, asking to sit on meetings, really put yourself out there.
And the strategic piece of that, I think, is so important, because oftentimes the VP or the controller, they get stuck in the books. So being able to get yourself out of that. And just one more piece, Kelly, jumping in, you said that 3/4 of the folks on our platform don't have PE experience. I think we reversed that.
Sorry.
25%.
25%.
Yes.
Don't have it. Yeah. 3/4 have it.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what you just said, because I think it's so important that I think that when I talk to mid-career folks that are maybe in that corporate controller role, that the skills that have gotten them there and that they're so excellent at are very transactional. And that has very little to do with my job, which is transformational. That I'm not the chief past officer, I'm the chief future officer. And so you have to be comfortable with that. If you like reporting on the past, well, then you probably don't want to be the CFO. If you want to impact decision making and you want to do some vision casting and change things, then I think that's where, if you're like, yeah, nod your head, yeah, that sounds fun. Okay, cool. Well, then you need to apply for the CFO role.
I like that. I'm going to steal that, chief future officer.
There, bam. The first time you say it, you have to say, as Robert Bendetti always says, and then after that, you can say it as what I've always been saying. what's the difference? Is there a difference between the terms private equity and private capital firms? Can you talk a little bit about private capital? I've been hearing more and more about that over the past 5 or 6 years. Do you care to speak to it? Any thoughts?
I actually have never heard the term private capital. I usually knee deep in the pre-funds now are the hot.
Yeah, there's so much money that's looking for return that in addition to being private equity going out there trying to buy businesses, there's some that are doing private lending. And private equity firms will sometimes use private capital firms because they'll give them massive amount of money super fast, and a bank will give you a little bit of money super slow.
Yeah, we see a lot of the mid-sized firms that really want to get into that market. So they have they might have, like Comvest, for example, has its private equity at its core, but also has its debt arm as well. So yeah, that's a big arm to get into.
Couple more questions from the chat box. When we talked about the exit of the firm, it sounded like exit of the CFO. Any of these transitions happen where the CFO stays around?
Very rarely. Very, very rarely. Yeah. It's a 24 to 36 month gig. And it's okay if you have on your resume, you've been at 5 or 6 different private equity firms. They expect it.
You talked about sense of urgency, and I know there's some folks on this call that think that their boss has a high sense of urgency, but they work at a private or God forbid, a large public company, and they don't really understand what that means. Can you talk a little bit more about the expectation of a sense of urgency of like one of those top 1,000 private equity firms?
Well, I think it goes about what we were saying before. You've got such a finite period of time to affect change before your company is sold. So it's always on the minds of the CEO and the CFO that it's nice to be able to do some analysis, find out what the right answer is, implement it. But if you're wrong, you've got to change that around pretty quickly because you only have so much time. Now, the good news is that you don't have thousands of shareholders out there that you have to answer to. You have to answer to one, that's the board. But that is, it's just always this sense of urgency. The clock is ticking.
But that's a two-sided coin, because that's a perk of it too, is that you get to make those changes and you get to see the fruit of your labor. And if it doesn't work, then you fix it the next month.
Questions around, we talked around analysis and the level of detail that the private equity firms want to see. And in my vast experience of one, it seems like these associates are like hella smart, and the level of detail that they required was like nothing I'd ever seen. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think some of us, we work for CEOs or entrepreneurs who are used to doing things off of gut or their feeling or their personal biases, and those people don't work at private equity firms. Can you talk a little bit about the level of detail necessary when you want to make that decision and you want to move forward and you want to go, that you don't just say, because I think, because I feel that way. Talk a little bit about the level of detail and analytics a little bit more, analysis.
Well, a lot of these professionals come by way of investment banking background. They'll do the classic, come out of college, do 2 years in investment banking, 2 years in private equity, and go off to MBA school. Or sometimes they'll just come out of investment banking and find the perfect fund and stay there. So they are, this whole idea of analysis, being the crackerjack investment banker starts very, very early in their career. So they don't go by their gut. It is all got to be proven in numbers and through analysis. Do you have anything else to add on that, Kelly?
No, I think I mean, that's a pretty good summary.
And that's why people will say investment bankers make really good CFOs.
Yes.
So we see a lot of that. I mean, we're actually currently seeing investment bankers are trying to make the leap to become a CFO into a portfolio company. And they seem pretty comfortable in doing that. And I think they're, more times than not, they're pretty effective in becoming the CFOs.
Well, I've known some some worse investment bankers than you, I think. I'll ask one more question while I do this, but I'm gonna change the presenter role to you, Kelly, so you can bring up your screen and talk a little bit about the platform. While she's doing that, Kelly, just sort of last question. If not, and you have a great use case here because it is kind of a hassle to break in. If somebody was dumb and they didn't use your platform to try to make those connections, or in addition to using this great tool, what are some other ways to make connections and be visible to private equity companies and operating companies backed by private equity companies? What are some things we need to be doing now so that we can position ourselves to be visible, to be considered for these roles?
I, for one, would start going to conferences. ACG conferences can provide some really good networking opportunities. Going to conferences where you can have speakers in your particular industry sector is also a good way to do it. And then, of course, using your own professional network, But we like to think of CFO Discovery as an extension of that network.
Awesome. I'm going to mute myself. And Kelly, please present away. I can see it. It looks great.
Okay, excellent. So just so everyone is aware, this is our app. And this is what I'm going to walk you through this. And this is essentially what you would be filling out if you were doing the application. But it's what you do in the application is your profile. So this is, just for the sake of privacy, this is Brian Moore is our COO. So I'm using his profile just to protect everyone else's privacy here. But so you see his name up at the top, his most recent position or his current position. You have the opportunity to add a photo here. And I recommend that everybody do that because similar to all of the other apps out there, having a photo means your profile is going to be that much more likely to get clicked on or to be clicked on. But so what the financial sponsors see, when they're looking at your profile, they see your profile details here. They have your email address, your phone, your LinkedIn. They have access to contact you directly. That's really the perk here. If I'm taking it into edit mode, I'm going back to that profile detail. Brian doesn't have his resume uploaded, but you have the option to upload that. And actually, we tell you to, because our financial sponsors, they're always asking for it, even if you don't have it on there, they like to see it. Rolling down into your current work experience, we don't ask you to recreate the wheel here, but there's some pertinent information that they like to see. So certainly name, number of reports, but the piece here. So did you have P&L responsibility for the business unit, or what was the size of it? The other option here, because he selected yes, if I select no, you have the option to answer that by way of budget. So that's something that you can indicate here, and that's something that they really like to see. In terms of experiences, I think it's unlimited, but really focusing on the last, say, 10 years. But at the bottom here, so keywords in our search engine is really powerful, and it scrapes your entire profile. It scrapes your resume, but there's an additional section that we've built in here that gives you the option to add that niche terminology. Whenever you're talking to somebody that's writing your resume, they're telling you not to put that jargon on here. This is where we want you to put it. And any other pieces of your background that, really help you stand out. from the rest of the crowd. We tell people stay away from terms like leadership, M&A, that type of stuff. That shows up on your resume anyway, and that comes out. But nobody is going on here searching for leadership. They're searching for very, very specific terminology like AstroTurf or something like that. Because I was talking to somebody recently about AstroTurf.
Or fence rental.
Yes, or fence rentals, right. Areas of expertise, have you ever run a business experiencing hypergrowth, turnaround or restructuring? And then the question, have you ever worked at a PE-backed company? This is the opportunity to ask here. Again, 25% of the people on our platform have not, and they're still getting traction. So that's not a be-all, end-all. Your education, no surprises here. Positions of interest. I always like to touch upon this. So full-time positions, certainly it seems like this crowd is going to be selecting CFO, or we do see some CEO. But rolling down here, so there's also the part-time roles that you can indicate here. Being an industry sector consultant or a functional area consultant, helping with deal sourcing or diligence, and then as a board member. I saw a question in the chat, the willingness to relocate. You can indicate what your willingness is here, whether it's a yes or a no. Industry sector experience, this is big. So we follow 9 primary industry sectors, but we also have 114 subsectors within them. So you can get drilled down quite a bit into what your expertise is. However, CFOs can be a little bit more agnostic in terms of where their industry specialties lie, but we do ask that you focus as much as possible on what you have that roll up your sleeves experience in, not just the advisory, but the operational experience. We take a look at this with a fine-tooth comb, and we really like to do our cross-checking to make sure that what you're saying here is something that our PE firms will be able to validate as well. So extra attention is paid here on the application review process. And then business functions, that's down here at the bottom. We added this just to supplement where your industry sector experience might lie. So before I jump off of this, there's one piece I really wanted to highlight. So we talk a lot about how the privacy is really at the forefront of our design. The profile visibility, you set that. The process is you fill out the application, my team and I review it, we will approve you, and you'll get further instruction as to how to go in and make your profile live. But before doing that, you have the option to select, in terms of other executives, some folks they like the opportunity to network with others that are on the platform, but you can block yourself from being seen by anyone else. In terms of the sponsor firms, you can default, it'll default to all. I tell people usually, so you can go on to or select all, but keep in mind that as our team is continuously adding more financial sponsors to the platform, they'll automatically be able to see your information. For those of you who are either working for a PE-backed firm or, perhaps you've done so in the past and you want to be a little bit more discretionary, selecting this final option down here, you can select all here, but it won't default to you being able to, or others being able to see you as they're coming on. You will manually select which of the 41 financial sponsors on here can see your information. So this is just another added insurance that your privacy is protected on the platform. Kelly, is there anything I'm missing?
Nope, I think you covered it.
This?
I just want to reiterate that private equity is not as picky with CFOs with regard to their industry sector and subsector experience. Yep. They're super picky with CEOs, but not as much with CFOs.
Okay.
And I also want to reiterate that CFOs in private equity are a hot commodity.
Yes.
If there's any time to try to break into it, it is now.
I like that. I'm writing that down next to CFO role is very important. CFO's hot commodity. 2 last questions as we wrap up in the next 2 minutes. One is we talked a little bit about location and travel, and you can pick relocate or not. normal jobs in general, I'm seeing it. There used to be 0% remote CFO jobs, and now I'm seeing 5-10%. And there's a lot of tech companies that don't even have any offices. They're just 100% remote all the time. What are you seeing on the platform with private equity-backed operating companies? Any percent remote?
I'm finding less and less. It's been interesting. The people who come on and are looking for CFOs, they actually want them in the area, particularly Southern California. They're able to put in a zip code and do a 100-mile radius. CFOs, more than any of the other positions, they've been requesting that they are within the area. So I don't know if it's just what we've seen, but might be swinging back to a more in-office scenario.
We've got folks that have experience both as CFO, and then they've transitioned from CFO and been promoted to CEO roles. Can folks submit to be both on the CFO platform and the CEO platform?
Yes, I just answered that that question in the chat also. So it's one application. How you would indicate that right now is in that positions of interest section, highlighting or selecting both the CEO and CFO.
Folks, this was fantastic. We have a bunch of questions we're not going to get to. I have like 10.
Okay.
I apologize, but we had a hard stop. What great info. Just to wrap up here, bias for action, how important that is in our everyday lives. And that if you're looking to add a skill, that operational experience, getting and understanding the business, maybe going along with an operations leader to put your hands on the biggest operational problem, or the best salesperson at your company, maybe go visit a customer with her and learn a little bit about how sales and growth leaders grow the business. Let's network, go to conferences, become a visible expert. Those are great reminders. And check out this platform. I am going to send out links for this platform so you can check it out and see what is available, both with CFO Discovery and CEO Discovery. And I'll share some contact information with the CFO Discovery team if you have any follow-up. And Kelly and Kelly, thank you both very, very much for sharing all this with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much.
Y'all have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.